Welcome to the Carnivore Cast, the podcast focused on the carnivore diet and lifestyle, with practical advice from successful carnivores, citizen scientists, and top researchers. I'm your host, Scott Meslinski, and I'm here to speak with experts and experienced carnivores to get answers to your biggest and meatiest questions while helping you live your best life as a carnivore. If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting the Carnivore Cast on Patreon. By becoming a patron, you'll help us reach more people and continue to create content on carnivore. There are also exclusive perks available, such as private Q&As, consultations with me, and more. Become a supporter at patreon.com/carnivorecast. Check the episode description for the link. Thank you, and I'll see you there. Dr. Shawn Baker at @SBakerMD on Instagram returns to the podcast for a third time. Shawn is one of the most genuine, friendly, and knowledgeable human beings I've had the pleasure of meeting in person. He uses his outspoken voice to inspire thousands of people to experiment with and thrive on carnivore. He's an orthopedic surgeon and lifelong multi-sport athlete, competing at the highest level and setting world records in Concept 2 erging, Highland Games, deadlifting, and rugby. He's also a backflipping, basketball dunking, and massive deadlifting 50-plus-year-old father. Shawn is the co-founder of MeatRx, a platform for people to connect, learn, and grow with the carnivore diet together. And he co-hosts the incredible Human Performance Outliers podcast, which is a favorite of mine and is constantly pushing against paradigms while educating the masses. Welcome back, Shawn.
Scott, man, thanks for having me on this. I just realized this has been our third time, so this has been cool. So thank you again. I always enjoying speaking to your audience, and so looking forward to today.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks so much for coming back. So how have you been? You've been very busy. Give us a bit of an update on life and also some of the stuff you have going on with MeatRx and what's been going on there.
Yeah, well, I mean, I continue to, just kind of press along doing this carnivore diet. And, I've been experimenting a little bit with different versions just for my own edification and to see how I react. I've been a little bit experimental now that I know I can do it without, keeling over and, maintain good health. And so it's been fun to kind of push some of the limits on there. Still, obviously, doing the physical stuff. I still train pretty hard, pretty much most days. And, But yeah, I mean, I've really sort of, we started this company called MeatRx.com. We actually kicked off July last year, my co-founder and I, and then we finally launched it on November 19th, the day that my book came out. And so we've been just seeing really good growth and really good traction and just great benefit for the people to do that. So I think for the foreseeable future, that will be a significant part of my life. And we have very big, lofty goals for what we want to achieve with that. And we're doing everything we can to make that happen. And so that has been a 24-hour-a-day job for me, quite honestly. There's a lot of stuff going on in the background, and that has been, just extremely, extremely important. Obviously I still have a presence on social media. We're just, the nice thing is, the more I've been in this community, the more I learn every day. And, I have the opportunity to talk to hundreds of people every single day. And I do. I spend every day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, interacting with the people in this community. And I've been really pointed about figuring out what's working well, what's not working so well for certain people, and where they fall in these categories, and how to adapt the diet and some of these other things to get the most success for people. I'll say this, I'll be bold enough to say this. I think a meat-based carnivorous diet is probably the most powerful lifestyle intervention that you can possibly do for pretty much every chronic disease out there. I fully believe that. With the more I do this, the more I believe that. And so I think as my passion for this grows, my desire to do more is growing, so I think this is just, this, as this movement has grown organically. It's not a funded movement. It is just basically people getting results and sharing the results and becoming just passionate advocates. And I think that says a lot, because ultimately results are, what we're about 100%.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And really, really appreciate everything you're doing with MeatRx. I think it's such a great platform and community for folks. Everything you're doing there is really impressive and helpful. And I love how throughout your whole journey, you've been laser focused on two things. from my perspective. One is results, getting people better outcomes, getting them healthier, getting them fitter. And two, democratizing the diet, really making it accessible to lots of people. And there's been a lot of, I think, just kind of hot button topics and controversy, both over the years and also recently, with things like, should you be incorporating honey? Should you be worried about your macro ratios, organs, all this stuff? Do you think we're improving on that front? Like, people are getting a broader view and zooming out and saying, like, hey, this is what really matters. This other stuff is like the 1%. Or how do you feel about how the movement is growing? And I feel like you've done a really good job of kind of navigating those topics and pushing through it and focusing on the core messages.
Yeah, I think that, it's fun to see, different versions and different varieties. What I tend not to agree with is for people to be very prescriptive and say, this is the only way, you must do this, or you are on the JV team, or you are not optimized, because I don't think there's any hard evidence that suggests that. I mean, I think it's nice to speculate and theorize, and we can talk about any number of controversies: grass-fed versus grain-fed versus organs versus no organs versus metabolic flexibility versus, just continue doing what you're doing. I think, and again, I think I like to say that the carnivore diet is not reverse veganism, because I think there is some people that start to become ideologic on this stuff, and they start to say, well, I believe that we should promote grass-finished animals or regenerative animals because I think it makes me feel better as a human to eat food that's been raised that way. And I understand it, and I agree 100%. But to then start to conflate health outcomes based on your environmental or ethical beliefs, I think is kind of smacks of veganism. And I really am going to push back against that. And so I think that we have to say, what is my goal? If my goal is health, what does it take to get me healthy? And, if it happens to coincide with my environmental beliefs, then that's great. But to say that if you don't do it exactly how I do it, you are somehow a bad person, or you're eating poison. And I don't see the data that supports that sort of assumption. And I'm happy to get that data. Like I said, as far as I know, I'm the one that's pushing for clinical studies and trying to make it happen, and dedicating my being and life to doing this. I'm going out on a limb, trying to get this stuff done. And so, I mean, there's people that will just say, I think because I can point to this mechanism. And I think if you've been looking at nutritional data as long as I have, you realize in mechanistic data, it's interesting, but it doesn't really result in human outcomes. You can always show some biochemical reaction, some nutrient level, some effect by doing something. Does that translate into healthy, happy, disease-free human beings? And I don't think you can prove that with just that sort of theory. And so I'm very cautious about what I say as far as what I think is effective. Do I know that a carnivore diet is optimal for all people? No. Does everybody need to do it? No. Do I think it's extremely powerful? Absolutely. I think it is the most powerful thing. But again, to say that for every single person out there, this is going to be the way and you have to do it this particular way, I don't know. And, like I said, the only thing I know is I don't know things, and I think that's at least a reasonable admission there. And, I think what we see is people say, "Oh, that sounds really cool. Let me try this for a few months." And we see this, and this is something, and I will continue to pay my respects for the people that came before me, the Charles Washingtons and the Kelly Hogans and the Lisa Wiedemans and the people that didn't get it much recognition, and no one knows who they are, really know who they are outside of the zero carb community. I mean, these guys have come and seen all this stuff, and they say, okay, these people think that you got to eat organ meats to thrive. And quite honestly, you see these people, they do it for 6 months, maybe they do it for a year, and then they stop doing as much. And then they realize that, yeah, maybe it wasn't as important as I thought it was. And it may be the fact that maybe they were really, really depleted initially when they came into the diet. And as their vitamin, the fat soluble vitamin levels sort of rose, they found that they didn't need to do that anymore. And, like I said, I just don't think we know. I mean, some of the questions, the Harvard study that's being done which is in process right now. One of the questions I made sure I told the researcher, hey, please ask this question. Please ask about grass finished versus grain finished meat in your question. How much? Because I think because if the results show that clearly eating grass finished beef results in a better health outcome, I'm absolutely going to let people know that. But as it stands right now, based on what I can observe doing formal surveys or informal surveys, I can't see a huge difference in the outcomes. And as much as I want it to be true, because as much as anybody else, I think we should practice regenerative agriculture. I do think we can use animals to heal the land. I think that's what the carnivore community or meat eaters in general should get behind, 100% behind that. But I'm not willing to let that belief cloud my health message when there's people that obviously they can't afford to eat high-end grass-finished meals every day. They just can't afford it. And I know there's people who say, well, you can get to a rancher and they'll cut up a cow for you and you put it in your freezer. Some of those people don't even have freezers. They don't have the freezer space. So I do think it's important that we can democratize this movement, this diet, make it affordable for people. And then, as you get healthier, as your particular financial life situation improves, you can get behind regenerative agriculture in a financial way. It doesn't mean you can't support it. Even if you're going to Walmart buying cheap ground beef, it doesn't mean you can say, hey, ranchers, I support you. I'd like to see more of you guys doing that. I'd like to see legislation passed, which would facilitate that so that maybe you guys can be bigger market players and maybe the costs will come down across the board and you guys can still make a living while providing healthy meat at a price that, healthy for the environment meat and potentially more healthy meat. Because again, I don't know the answer. We know that yet. So I think that is a very important point. I've been very consistent about this. This isn't a diet only for the wealthy. I don't want to pander to just people that can pay me a lot of money. And I know there's people that's their marketing model is I'm just going to talk to rich people and make them live a little bit longer. I'm going to give them that 5% of optimization. I don't, I'm not going to criticize for making money that way, but it's not what I want to do, at least ethically. I want to, and certainly I want to be successful and certainly I want to impact millions of lives and I want to do it through MeatRx. And ultimately, yes, that will make me an income and hopefully a very nice income because I sacrificed tremendously from what my income standpoint was compared to when I was a fairly wealthy orthopedic surgeon to a guy who doesn't even have a job. So, but I'm not going to do it at a way that I think is, not truthful, not ethical.
This episode is brought to you by Optimal Carnivore. Optimal Carnivore was created by carnivores for carnivores. They've recently released a new product, a grass-fed bone marrow. It is the whole bone extract, which includes the bone marrow, the cartilage, and collagen peptides. Our ancestors would have eaten the whole animal, including bones, and especially the marrow. All the nutrients and substances that your body needs to build, repair, and maintain your bones, teeth, and connective tissue can come from the bone marrow. It's a complex that contains the same components as home-cooked bone broth, but making bone broth can be a hassle. You have to source high-quality bones, boil them for days, and this is a simple, convenient alternative that's gently freeze-dried so it preserves all the nutrients completely intact. It's perfect for people who are traveling or don't have time to make bone broth themselves. Visit www.amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and use the code carnivore10 to receive 10% off your purchase. I'm a huge supporter of that, and I agree with everything you said, Shawn. I think we need to avoid elitism at the end of the day, and really not try to create a perfect varsity level carnivore diet. I love how you put it like that. And the more and more I have spent time in this space and talked to people and followed people, I was initially very skeptical of some of the claims that the veteran carnivores, if you will, the Kelly Hogans and Lisa Wiedemans and Charles Washingtons of the world made, just because a lot of what they said kind of felt like almost like principles or religious doctrines of like, this is the carnivore way, this is the way it has been, this is the way it always will be. But you realize over time, you come to appreciate that, a lot of nutrition science is horrible. We know that. But also they've been helping thousands of people for decades with this diet. They have seen it all. And I think that experience is so invaluable. And I've done a bit of a 180 on this where I just find their perspectives really, really useful. And I know Kelly is always commenting on your posts and interacting with people on Instagram and saying like, this is the way I've done it. This is the way all these people I've helped have done it. This is my experience. And she's just so much trying to help people. And you know that she's gathered so much information, she's synthesizing it. So I think there's a lot of really useful information there. And I think using that to democratize the diet is really important.
Yeah. And I want to, let me just jump in here, Scott, if you don't mind, because, one of the things,
please.
Like I said, I spend every day, every morning, 1 hour, every day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, interacting with this community. And I ask them, hey, what's working for you? Hey, what are you doing? What's your situation? And I do think there are ways that you can sort of tailor the diet based on that. Let me give you an example. I think people that have diabetes, I think people that have insulin resistance metabolic syndrome do better on a higher fat version, and sometimes a very high fat version. And I think that helps with their glycemic control. I think it helps with inflammatory issues. Conversely, I think there's people that are metabolically healthy. These guys are athletes that are trying to put on muscle. They're trying to compete in sports. They often better with more protein in the diet. And so I think just that simple dichotomy is important to realize now. And will I concede? I mean, certainly there are people that say that, hey, I ate liver and I feel better. Good for you. I don't disagree with your observation. I think that's completely fine. If it works for you, works for you. I would never discourage anyone from doing that. But what I'm not willing to say is if you're not eating liver, you are not optimized, because I don't think that's a fair statement to say. I think there's the evidence that shows that is, not very good. And, how do we determine that? Well, we'd have to do a study, obviously, or at least some approximation of a study. And no one has done that. It's not the first thing I want to do on my list of studies that I get done. I mean, the first study that we're going to do is going to be, more looking at, is a carnivore diet sustainable and safe? I mean, because there's a safety concern. Are you going to get nutrient deficient? Are you going to have significant adverse events? You have to clearly demonstrate that in the clinical literature. And if you demonstrate that, which I hope we'll be able to, then that allows for the follow-on studies. Then we can say, hey, let's take the Crohn's patients or the ulcerative colitis patients, put them on a carnivore diet for 6 months and see what their outcome is. So like I said, there's so many people that were like, well, we want you to do this and this and that in the study. And, like I said, I if you don't mind, I'll touch on the study we were trying to fund.
Yeah, I was just about to ask about the clinical trial you're referring to now, not the Harvard study, right?
So yeah, the Harvard study is David Ludwig's group, Belinda Leonard's. It was an observational study. It's basically just a survey study. It's going to say, hey, these are people that have done a carnivore diet for 6 months, and these are the results. That's great. That's fine. That's going to be in the literature. It's going to be 2,000 plus participants. Probably later this year, it'll be finished and ready for publication. But an interventional trial is, I think, so much more powerful, particularly a randomized controlled trial, which is what we're going to certainly try to do assuming we get enough funding. And, obviously I've been leaning on the carnivore community. These people that have lives have been changed. Just throw in $5. I mean, there's so many of them out there. If they just do it, we'd be funded in no time. I mean, we're doing good. I mean, we're at basically almost 70,000 of the projected 200,000. I've talked to professional researchers. It's not me that's doing the study. I don't want to give any impression. I'm not a researcher. I'm not going to waste money by having me do a study and screwing it up. We're going to hire professional researchers that are doing it. And we've had a number of researchers that have actually approached us and said, hey, we'd love to do this study. So we've already got the researchers. We got to figure out which ones we're going to go with, but we've got several that have been interested in this. The protocol, the design is, we're kind of making that sort of, kind of working on what we're going to be looking for outcome measures. But it's just going to be a matter of, how big of an effect it's going to show, how many participants you need to show that effect, and then having enough money to actually make it happen. And so that's where we're going with that. One way or another, we'll get it done. Hopefully sooner rather than later. We'll raise the money any way we can. I mean, like I said, I'd love it to be crowdfunded fully. But if we have to get, donations from other entities, whether they're, investors or something along those lines, we'll have to see. But this is an important step forward for our community. I think you and I didn't need studies to do this. Obviously, we're willing to trust our own results and look at, other anecdotes, which if we look at epidemiology, much of epidemiology, when we look at nutritional epidemiology, it is really just a collection of anecdotes. I mean, you're literally just asking people self-reported data on what they ate. I mean, this is, how do you verify that? You don't. what do you think you ate? Here's an FFQ, fill it out the best of your ability. People often misrepresent what they eat. They often forget what they ate. So you don't really know. And so that data is probably not really particularly useful, but 90%, 80% of our nutrition research is based upon that. So to discount the anecdotal studies or the anecdotal reports that you and I have all seen, now the hundreds and even thousands, we see every day people just dramatically changing their life. That inspires enough people to do it. But to get the medical community in general, and I think this is an important step, to get these guys to be willing to prescribe it for their patients, to take their Crohn's patients, say, I'm going to put you on a carnivore diet, to take their diabetic patients and put them on a carnivore diet. I think we need to do the clinical studies. And I think that's important. And that's going to have a much greater impact on, the population as a whole. Whereas right now, the plant-based studies, there's so many of those studies out there because the community's funded it. Fortunately for them, they have industries that have vested interest in making a plant-based diet successful that have funded studies. So we just don't really have that really on the carnivore side yet. Maybe the meat industry would step up and fund some studies. Again, there's going to be obviously criticisms about the funding source if that happens. But again, still, if the studies get done, at least in the literature, that's going to give some people, because, whether you think the conflict of interest exists or not, the data is still there. And if it's transparent, it's reasonably transparent. And, like I said, maybe we can get NIH studies done at some point. Again, the funding for that is not easy to get. There's a long waiting list for people who want that money. It's many years. You have to figure out how to jump through the hoops in the system. So it's not just like, hey, call up the NIH, ask for $250,000 and you get your study done. It doesn't work that way. Otherwise, we would have done it already. So it's a painful process. Well, I don't know if it's painful, but it's just a long grinding process to get the funding. And hopefully, like I said, the carnivore community will step up in a big way and help us out.
Yeah, I really hope so. And I'd encourage all listeners to give whatever you can, throw a couple bucks at the GoFundMe. It's in Shawn's Instagram profile. And I contributed. I think it's such critical work. And it's really just the start of climbing this mountain of having good research to support the diet. There's a lot of research out there that points towards low carb, ketogenic style diets in terms of outcomes, weight loss, disease prevention, metabolic improvement. But really, if we want medical community to accept a carnivore diet, we need to get the ball rolling on this, and really appreciate all the hard work you're putting into it, Shawn. So shifting topics a little bit, you mentioned some experiments you've been doing now that you've been on the diet longer and you're not afraid that certain things are going to kill you. So I'd love to peel back the onion on that. What are some things you've tried and what are some things you've found recently?
Yeah. So, as you know, over the years, I've been, doing this rowing, and there's a certain, I guess, physical demands that I needed to do to break world records on the row. I had to be a certain size. I had to have a certain amount of strength. And with that became a certain amount of food to do that and a certain body composition. And, I've been doing this for 7 years. I've won world championships. I've set multiple world records. And quite honestly, I'm like, well, I'm not as interested in it anymore. And I said, well, let me take on the next challenge. And just for the fun, and some people think it's crazy. Some people like it or don't like it. I said, I'm gonna mess around with CrossFit because I in general like being competitive. And I thought as an athlete, even though I'm not by any stretch of the imagination an ideal body type for CrossFit, I'm way too tall, I'm way too heavy. But I guess I'm just maybe crazy enough or confident enough to think that I can do it at a relatively high level. And when I say high level, it means compete at, maybe even go to the actual CrossFit games as a master's athlete. And so I'm 53 now. And so my target is, let me get to 55. That'll give me 2 years to practice, to learn the skills, work on obvious weak points, and so being really tall with long arms, I've got some significant disadvantages when it comes to some of the gymnastics type stuff and, just moving through space as quickly as a smaller person can. So I've got some limitations. I've got some strengths too. Certainly those things will lend me some strength in certain areas. And so the goal is not to just suck in certain things. I mean, it's, first it's not, and then hopefully you've got a passable level of competence in these different events, and hopefully the strong can carry you through. And then the attrition rate of being just healthy, because as people get older, the competition falls away, which is kind of interesting. But so one of the things, I went down to this local CrossFit gym, which is a pretty nice facility down by my house, and they've had actual high level competitors. And the guy said, "Look, man, we're happy to get you there, and if you've got the work ethic, try, but you're probably too heavy." And I agree. So I said, I'm gonna lean out. I'm just gonna drop weight. And so I very intentionally tried to lean out. I've never done that before, because my goal was focused on something else. And a lot of people are saying, well, how did you get so lean? So the first thing I did is something that I think works for most people. Now, I was already relatively lean. It wasn't like I was obese. I mean, you saw pictures of me from 6 months ago. I was clearly not obese. Most people would be pretty happy where I was from a body composition standpoint. But I went on a very high protein version of Carnivore Diet. And fat was still an important part of the role, but it was very much lean protein dependent, and there was some fat cycling in there. And I did it in a way that I've actually used when I coach clients on what they were successful. So I knew it was going to work. And so it was just a matter of, making it happen. I spent about 2 months eating leaner meats, cycling in fats periodically about every 3 to 5 days. And I got as lean as I've ever been in my life. I dropped about 20 pounds, got basically, you've probably seen the photos. I mean, very, very lean.
Yeah. Shredded.
Shredded. And, and lo and behold, it was easier to do pull-ups, because I didn't weigh 20 pounds more. And so, that's clearly helped. And, but honestly, I don't find that to be sustainable over the long term. I think we are fat-seeking animals. I think fat is very important. And so while it helped me to get very lean, I just don't think I could do that, more than a few months at a time. And I think, like I said, now, so then the question becomes, what can you do for maintenance? And, quite honestly, probably a moderate approach works pretty well for that. But the other thing, this is the other thing. And when I first went on the Carnivore Diet, I've been doing it about a year or something, I took some labs, and one of the criticisms was you had a relatively high blood glucose. It was like 125 or something, like fasting. My A1C was high. And I did a lot of research into that. And the interesting thing is, when I look at the carnivore community as a whole, I was a huge, huge outlier. Most people, diabetics, type 1 diabetics, type 2 diabetics, people with pre-diabetics, see their glucose dramatically fall. We have people at CGMs where they see their glucose absolutely stabilized. It's super low, super steady, nothing like where I was at. And so I've been widely criticized for that. And so doing research on that, I was seeing that it had really almost nothing to do with the diet. In fact, when I ate, my blood glucose would go down often, or it would make no impact. It was 100% down to how I was exercising. I would see, because in the way I was exercising, as the more I understand that when you do high intense style exercise, your liver production of glucose goes up something like 15-fold, maybe even 25, 30-fold in an athlete. So you see these prodigiously high blood glucoses, and this is, for the average person. Now, I was training like a friggin' Olympic athlete. I mean, anybody that saw what I was doing or what I've done, particularly at the times I was putting out short, high intense bursts of highly, highly glycolytic, highly, highly hepatic glycogenolytic or gluconeogenic output, super high blood glucoses after exercise. So what happens is that takes some time to recover. And I had diabetic pathophysiology going into this. I was probably pre-diabetic in my 40s. And so when you do this, you have this response because of the way I was training. And what I wasn't doing is, and what the converse is if you do moderate intense exercise, say you go for a little bit of a moderate paced walk or a light jog, what you see is the exact opposite occurs. Is you see that blood glucose drops quite a bit. We see that in both non-diabetics and diabetics. And so because I was only doing the highly, highly glycolytic stuff, and I was only doing it primarily in the morning, which is probably the worst time from an insulin sensitivity standpoint, because you just don't have the insulin sensitivity to counter that glucagon, that cortisol, that counter-regulatory bump in glucose. And so the combination of training like a friggin' maniac and then not doing the cool downs. I didn't do cool downs because I was busy. I'm like, I'm going to go 3 minutes all out as hard as I can on the rowing machine, like my life depended on it. You know, world-class levels, even for 20-year-olds. I'm throwing world-class numbers up there, seeing high blood glucose concentrations, taking a while for it to come back down, and that causing the average glucose to go up. And then also the anticipatory response, because what you see is when you know you're going to do exercise, your body gets prepared. So your liver starts cranking up the glucose. And so since I stopped doing that, I mean, I still do the high intensity training, but now what I do is I change the time of the day often. And then I also make sure I do a prolonged cool down after that. So it might be 3 minute all out, but 20 minutes of just something chilling out. And that's had a dramatic effect, improving my glycemic control. Also playing with the higher fat approach is also like dramatically. So it's like, I'm, blood glucose, I checked it randomly last night, it was 64. So, I mean, it's just like, you see these really nice numbers. So I think that's an experiment for me. And I think, like I said, when I'm talking with the diabetics in the MeatRx community, we talk to them every day and we talk about, hey, I want you to try this. And they try it and we get the results, and we're seeing these very consistent patterns, and so it's interesting. It's just learning what's going on here, because like I said, there was a paper I read from 1920 the other day. Ash Simmons put it up on Twitter. I don't know if you know who Ash is. He's a really, I really like listening to him.
He inspired me to start the diet, actually.
Yeah. So he's for those who don't know, I think he's from New Zealand, Kiwi guy, and he's been doing this for a while. And he's just he's got a very, I guess, sarcastic, wry way of putting out data, and it's all usually always spot on. And he's another one of these guys who's been in the community for a long time. But study from 1920, I believe 2021, right before they invented insulin, and it was 73 bad, sick diabetics. These people, the end result of type 1 diabetes is people waste away to their deathbed. I mean, they literally just fall apart. And these are people that were 100 pounds, 70 pounds, that were dying of diabetes. I mean, the blood glucose was wildly out of control. They had massive glycosuria, and they're peeing off all this glucose. Sick, some of them on their deathbed, some with horrible infection. Took 73 of those people, put them on a 90% fat diet. 100% of those people became completely free of glucose in their urine, which means they dropped their glucose completely. 3 people ended up dying in that study because of how sick they started out. I mean, these are sick people dying of sepsis or infection, but all of them recovered to normal glycemic control. Many of them afterwards maintained that as type 1 diabetics, normal glucose control without insulin hadn't been invented yet, and regained weight and got back to normal. This is how we treated this disease before we had the medications we have. So this is fascinating. And so I'm seeing this within the community, in the carnivore community, certainly type 2 diabetics coming off insulin, coming off, Januvia and metformin, and all the other drugs are on, and their normal blood glucose, all these other markers coming down. But even type 1 diabetics, we're seeing guys that lifelong type 1 diabetic, 20, 30 years, coming off almost all their insulin. Normal A1Cs, 5.2, 4.9, incredible. Non-diabetic A1Cs as a type 1 diabetic, which is extremely, extremely unusual. We've even had a couple, and I know this is an extremely controversial statement, say, I've gotten off all my insulin, and I've been a diabetic for 16 years.
Wow.
Ben Bickman's seeing this too. I mean, he's seen that with these diabetics as well. And we're like, well, this is really, really interesting. This would be consistent with that 1920 study where, there's no insulin there's no insulin invented yet. And so I think it's such a powerful tool. I'm not suggesting that all type 1 diabetics could be off insulin, but there seems to be a small subset where they respond enough where they've been able to do that. And Ben Bickman and I, postulated maybe they were mischaracterized or misdiagnosed as MODY, maturity onset diabetes of youth. Maybe that's going on. We do know that even diabetics, particularly type 2s, beta cell function is still there. It may be suppressed. The beta cells may not be secreting insulin anymore, but they're still beta cells, or some of them dedifferentiate. So they become kind of more primitive stem type cells. And can they reverse that? Can they return back into beta cells? Can they turn that machinery back on where they start secreting insulin again? I think the answer is probably yes. And what allows that? I mean, if you talk to like Dr. Richard Bernstein, he would say, if you can prolong normal glycemia blood glucose under 100 for prolonged periods of time, then yes, you may see beta cell recovery. And that may just be, you might just unwind the clock, because you have this spiral down where, you become insulin resistant. And then, as finally the insulin can't keep up, you have this hyperglycemic effect. And then as the hyperglycemia gets worse, beta cells start dying. And then it becomes worse and worse and worse. You just spiral out of control. But if you can turn that thing backwards by having normal glycemia through diet and lifestyle, then maybe some of those beta cells grow back and you can produce more insulin, appropriate insulin, and you can turn it around. And so I think that could be hopeful for these people. I'm excited about that.
Yeah, super interesting. And I remember you had, I think it was either on your blog. I think on your Shawn Baker website, you had an extensive post about glycogen metabolism in high performance athletes a couple of years ago, addressing some of those points you made about your elevated HbA1c and fasting glucose. I found that really helpful.
Yeah, there's a study, 2016 study looking at sub-elite athletes, and these are guys that were lean, low inflammatory markers, otherwise healthy, doing a lot of high intense exercise, and they had really high blood glucoses. They had diabetic and pre-diabetic blood glucoses, and they strapped them to CGMs and saw that they were way out of range much of the time while they were exercising. And interestingly, the ones on the lower carbohydrate diet, it was only a cohort of about 10 patients, but the ones eating the least carbohydrates and training the hardest had the highest glucose fluctuations. And so that's exactly the situation I was in. I was eating no carbohydrates and training like a friggin' maniac. And so I think, like I said, I think it was 100% down to exercise in my particular case, because again, we look at the general carnivore community and they're all seeing, particularly the ones that have high blood glucose are seeing dramatic drops, which is the opposite.
Yeah. And now, Shawn, you're doing a higher fat approach. Why is that? And how have you found it?
Well, like I said, I want to experience the higher fat approach just because I think it's important to, when I'm recommending it for certain subsets, to know what it's like. And so certainly from a palatability standpoint and a food enjoyment standpoint, yeah.
It wins.
I would
higher fat wins.
I definitely prefer eating ribeyes to sirloins. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, that's absolutely the case. How high of fat you need to go, I think it depends on what you're dealing with. But to be all completely truthful and honest, I'm not as lean as I was on the high protein approach. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination not lean right now. I'm still incredibly lean.
Yeah, definitely.
But I was a little bit leaner, maybe 2%. But I'm okay with that. I'm fine being, super lean at 53 and eating a high fat diet. I don't have a problem with that at all. Now, if I wanted to get, for whatever reason, 2% leaner, then I would probably go back to a leaner approach. The other thing I notice, at this point, I haven't really noticed a significant difference in my athletic performance.
I was going to ask.
I think it's pretty equivalent. Although I haven't done the crazy hard stuff recently. I'm doing more. I'm still doing relatively hard stuff for, if you see what I do on Instagram, I'm still doing hard workouts, but they're not quite the super hard metabolic stuff that I'd done before. So too early to tell on that. I'm really, like I said, as I get closer to 4 years on the diet, which will be later this year, I might do another round of labs. And just to see, just to see where things are. And because, I don't necessarily think that they are the end all be all for everything. I mean, I'd like to repeat my coronary artery calcium scan at some point. It was 0, a year and a half ago or whenever I did. No, I guess it's been 2 years since I've done that. Has it been 2 years, 1 year or 2 years? I can't remember. But at some point, at a proper interval, doing it every year doesn't make sense. So maybe when I'm 55, I might do that. There may be some other tests like carotid intermediate thickness tests I might do. Those things are secondary for me, right now. But like I said, my focus has been so much on the MeatRx stuff and how to grow that and, how to get to the next level. Is really what I'm focused in. So the personal experimentation, while it's fun, I've got bigger fish to fry, so to speak.
Good for you. You've got a bigger purpose, bigger meaning. And just curious, one point on that is you mentioned that performance has been similar between high protein and high fat, but the fact that you were able to lose so much fat and be in, what is likely a calorie deficit on the high protein version and have equivalent performance to now eating higher fat, potentially being in a slight surplus or maintenance, that could be something to be said there about the fact that you're able to maintain that with higher protein. I don't know. But moving on, I wanted to ask, have you eliminated dairy? I know you used to eat more cheese and you even had tried some Greek yogurt for a short time. Is that something that you've eliminated from your diet or you're playing with?
That goes in phases. Certainly, I had definitely, I would say all things being equal over time, of the number of times I've played with this, and I've done this many times, because I think we all like dairy. I brought it back in and then I take it out. And I find that if I bring it in significant quantities for any length of time, I generally, for various reasons, decide to take it back out and I feel better typically. I spent, that whole time getting lean. Well, let me just go back to this because, the lean meat was definitely accompanied by fat refeeds. Initially, I was accomplishing that by including dairy. And I quickly found out that wasn't the best way to do, just because I think one of the things that occurs is it's very easy to overconsume dairy. I think, when you're eating, beef trimmings versus yogurt and heavy cream, I find that the beef trimmings just are far more satiating. It's harder to eat more of that. But if I eat heavy cream, particularly if you add some kind of sweetener to that, and many people still do that, that is like the license to just gorge. You make ice cream, you make a cheesecake, you can make heavy cream with a little bit of stevia. That leads to just high amounts of fat and probably more than you quite honestly need. And so I think that may be the biggest caveat to there. Now, whether it's inflammatory, whether it's the casein or some of the other proteins that some people react negatively with, I think that's still a valid concern as well. And some people certainly have problems with that. And again, when you say dairy, dairy is not just one word. There's lots of dairy. Is it cheese? Is it hard cheese? Is it soft cheese? Is it A2 dairy? Is it, is
butter?
It butter? Is it ghee? Yeah. Is it so on and so forth? And I think we all have different responses to that. So currently, as of today, I've reintroduced a little bit of dairy back in. I've been throwing some butter on my steaks, because one of the problems with ribeye steaks when you're doing a really high fat approach is ribeyes aren't fatty enough. It's
crazy.
Sad enough to say, it's like, well, a ribeye steak is maybe 60, maybe if you get a really nice more one, you might get 70% of your calories out of fat.
And then you grill them and you lose a lot of fat, right?
Well, yeah. And depending on how you cook it, and like I said, that's one of the reasons I like that really high temperature grill I have, because it cooks it so fast. You maintain a lot of the flavor and fat in there. And so that's one of the advantages to real fast, super high heat cooking. But the comparison you made about caloric deficit versus caloric surplus, I'm not sure that's true, although I'm not accurately measuring. But I when I was eating high protein, I was eating quite a few calories still, 3,000-4,000 calories. I was eating 3-5 pounds of food a day, some days still. So, and I think, as there's the sort of thermic effect of protein. You might have a little bit higher caloric leeway with protein than you do with some of these other macronutrients. And then obviously some people will point to, like David Ludwig's study from 2018, looking at the caloric advantage to carbohydrates. But regardless, if you're comparing high-fat carnivore to lean protein carnivore, you may still even have more of an advantage to eat a little bit more advantage, eating more calories on a higher protein approach for some people. I know when it comes to weight loss, it seems to be context dependent. There are people out there that say they don't seem to lose weight on higher protein because they eat too much, because they're not satiated. And I do think that satiety is a huge deal. And I think, again, this comes into where you're getting your fat sources from. I find that if I eat steak plus egg yolks plus beef trimmings, my satiety level is very high relative to if I'm eating steak plus dairy, then my satiety is not as high. And so it might be that that could be the difference. And so again, if you are I mean, I'm not someone that denies that calories has a role. I think they clearly do, for weight loss, for whatever. And again, with the caveats being that, you know, you might have more of an advantage with more protein, and maybe low carb gives you a little additional advantage. But I think you can't just throw out the concept of calories mattering completely. Now, for many people, there's such a satiating effect from a carnivore diet that it's irrelevant, you know, because you don't have to count, you don't have to track, you don't have to care. You just don't eat as much. But I clearly, absolutely 100% see people and know people that either can't lose weight or gain weight, including body fat, on a carnivore diet. And I do think that not hitting satiety or overeating protein or fat, primarily fat, is going to be an issue.
Yeah. And can you just talk through like what some of your sample meals were on the higher protein versus the higher fat?
Yeah, so it would be sirloin steaks, and I use a company called Certified Piedmontese, great company out of Nebraska.
Yeah, I love their steaks.
Yeah, I mean, and just so people understand, they have cows that are missing a myostatin gene, and so they grow more muscle, and the muscle is accompanied with less fascia. And so what happens is these very lean steaks don't have much they're not chewy, they're not hard. And so when you eat a lean steak from these guys, it's very tender. It eats like a much fattier steak, which makes it much more pleasant to do it that way. But so a lot of that stuff, I definitely ate a lot of seafood, shrimp, which is, as you know, is almost completely protein. There's very little fat in that. Now, how you cook it can alter that. If you smother it in butter, then you're going to raise the fat. So, you know, grilling it might be a better option. I did use fat because I was still probably getting about 30% of my calories from fat. I ate a lot of whitefish. You know, I ate a lot of what was it, flounder, which I found quite palatable, you know, and I really enjoyed that. So that was probably the majority of my diet was lean meats, sirloin steaks, and fish and seafood. I didn't go into chicken. I could have, but I didn't really want to do that. And then, like I said, on the fat refeed days, it was back to the ribeyes, back to the egg yolks, those types of things. And, that was kind of the thing. And I definitely had to deal with a little bit more hunger. There was no doubt about it. I kind of, ghrelin is one of those hunger hormones. It sort of peaks later in the day. So I tried to hack that where I was eating later so that I was able to at least have food in my stomach when the ghrelin monster woke up in the evening. And then I had, it was a lot of water and stuff like that, trying to just hack that. There are studies out there showing that drinking a bunch of water can actually subdue the appetite for a short period of time. It doesn't last forever. But if it's 8 p.m. and you're kind of hungry and you just slug down, a quart or two of water, and you're not hungry because you're just bloated with water, it might get you that hour or two to bedtime, and then you go to sleep and you wake up the next day and you're not that hungry again. So you got to deal with hunger more. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And so, like I said, long-term sustainability, not something I would like to do the rest of my life. And that's the other thing, the fat refeed days. When I started to feel like, this hunger is getting a little unmanageable, or I started to feel tired or didn't have energy, or maybe started to feel a little bit cold, it was like, okay, you got a fat-free feed tomorrow. So it was very intuitive. And, it worked. I mean, it got me lean. It did the job it was supposed to do. And the people that, we put out this little carnivore shred guide, which is based on this on MeatRx.com. And the people that are using it get the same results. They get very lean, and I think it works better for people that aren't dealing with craving still, because I think there's like when I wrote, I used to say earlier on, eat meat like it's your job. And the reason for that, and I still think it's true today, is you have to deal with those food addiction, carb craving demons. You have to be able to overcome those first. That's goal number one. And that means eat as much as you need to eat. I say this all the time. How much do I need to eat? You need to eat enough so you don't want cupcakes or whatever, insert your food. That's how much you eat in the beginning. And then once you kind of get past that point, maybe it's 2-3 months, 6 months into the deal, then it's time to say, do I need to change anything? And if so, what do I need to do? And I think that's how I approach it.
Yeah, that's an excellent approach. And Shawn, do you have any plans to experiment with carbs, honey, white rice, fruit? And what's your opinion on other carnivores using these sources?
First of all, my opinion on other people, I think do whatever works for you, man. I am not opposed to that at all. I'm not going to say, oh my God, you're somehow, an apostate because you had a teaspoon of honey once a day or something like that. I know Paul Cialadino's playing with that. I don't think there's anything wrong with running those experiments. I think, be objective about what they're doing. Is this metabolic flexibility maintenance? Is it necessary? Is important? I don't think we know that. I think that, for some people, if it's working, keep doing what you're doing. Don't fix what's not broke. I did those experiments a lot when I was doing keto. I mean, I did the carb refeeds, the backloading. I did the carb nights. I did the cyclic ketogenic diets. I did all those things. And for me, the any net gain was dramatically sort of undermined by the net negatives. It was just digestive issues. It was just inflammatory responses, and again, some of the people argue with me, well, maybe it wasn't the right carbs and maybe it wasn't the right timing and maybe the dosage was wrong. And I think that's really a valid argument. A few years ago, I did, I was looking at a glucose tolerance test. I did basically my own at home, and I did one, and my blood glucose shot up pretty high. It was like, I can't remember, it was 300 or something like that, really high. I would, obviously, but I was, zero carb and been forever. So I did the experiment for like 3 days or 4 days. I ate carbohydrates. I was like rice and bananas and ice cream, to be honest, and some of these other things. I was like, oh, that'd be cool. Let's do this for fun. I didn't feel very good. I mean, I was like, I had headaches and blurry vision because surely that was making my blood glucose go up, even eating that stuff. And then I repeated the oral glucose tolerance test, and the response was better, which, again, shows you still maintain that metabolic flexibility if you just introduce that in there. So I have no plans on doing that currently. I'm not opposed to saying that I would never do that down the road. I just, I don't really necessarily buy into the, belief that you can't, you irrevocably, forever reduce your capacity to deal with carbohydrates if for some reason you later do that. I mean, I think the same transition occurs in reverse, basically. When you go on a zero carb diet, there is a transition period. You feel not so good. You get carb, the carb flu or the keto flu or whatever. And I think the same thing happens in reverse. And I think I could be on a carnivore diet for 10 years. And if I wanted to, for whatever reason, I could reintroduce carbohydrates back into my diet over a period of a couple weeks, maybe a few months. And I probably would, still be able to metabolize carbs and use them as a source of fuel. I think that's clear. I mean, we even see, it's interesting. I mean, when you look into the research on like even cats, and dolphins and some of these other carnivores, because there's studies on this stuff where there's studies on these actually chickens and stuff like that, where they seem to be missing the production of a certain, enzyme in the carbohydrate metabolism. I can't remember, it was like a hexokinase or something like that. But when they introduce carbohydrates in their diet, they actually start to express those enzymes, which they normally don't produce. And we know that like a cat, which most of us would agree that a cat is a carnivorous animal. Cats, experimental house cats, and they've done these studies, which, spend their lives being carnivorous, can tolerate something like a 65% carbohydrate diet. They can metabolize 90% of the sugar that is put into their system. And so, these animals, even, within, the mammalian species, can readapt to this stuff. And so to say that as a human, because you're not eating honey once in a while, I think honestly, some people, they just want to eat some honey. I think there's some of that, that's fine. Like I said, I would rather you do a diet that you can sustain and you enjoy over a period of your lifetime than stick to some zealot, dogmatic belief system. And again, this is not reverse veganism. Like I say, the vegan diet is an ideologically based diet. I don't promote a carnivore diet as an ideologic based diet. And so, if it makes it more sustainable for you, and if you get a perceived benefit, go for it. That's fine.
Yeah, I think that's a great approach. And I never try to be dogmatic about you have to do carnivore this way, or I often say, people say like you have one piece of chocolate, dark chocolate or something like that, and you're not carnivore. I think for some people with autoimmune conditions or severely diabetic or metabolically deranged people, they have to be uber strict. And I think it can work to be uber strict for most people, and you have to draw the line somewhere. But for a lot of people, doing what Mark Bell is doing or what Ted Naiman is doing, where you're having a primarily animal-based diet, meat-based diet, where you have some of these other things around it, maybe some vegetables, maybe some fruit, can work really well. And I think the foundation of the diet always needs to be meat and needs to be meat-based. And if you're 90% carnivore and those other things keep you compliant and they're not making you feel, perform, or look much worse, then go for it. But I think at the end of the day, we have to be honest with ourselves about why we're doing it. And I completely agree with your point. I was listening to a great podcast with Robert Sykes, Keto Savage guy, talking about how, either way, when you reintroduce carbs or you take away carbs, like the body adapts and you're going to have an adverse reaction at first, but you can slowly get back to it. Great. Well, Shawn, this has been incredibly helpful. Great to catch up with you as always. I'm really excited for a lot of the work you're doing with the clinical trial and MeatRx. And I'll, of course, have links to all of that in the show notes and at carnivorecast.com. But thanks again for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Scott, and thanks for what you do. I think you provide a valuable service to the members in this community and people that are curious about the community. I think you do a great job with the podcasting stuff, and good luck to you. And again, hopefully we'll get to meet up again in real life. When sort of coronavirus craziness has left us behind. I have faith in humanity that we will have large gatherings again and we'll shake hands again.
Yeah,
that is my belief. But
we'll see.
Like I said, we'll have to see. You're right.
Well, thanks, Shawn. Hope you have a great rest of your day. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting the Carnivore Cast on Patreon. By becoming a patron, you'll help us reach more people and continue to create content on carnivore. There are also exclusive perks available, such as private Q&As, consultations with me, and more. Become a supporter at patreon.com/carnivorecast. Check the episode description for the link. Thank you, and I'll see you there. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Carnivore Cast. If you enjoyed this episode, please review on iTunes. It really helps us out. And share it with a friend. What questions would you like answered, or who would you like to hear from in the carnivore research community? You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at CarnivoreCast, or go to carnivorecast.com. You can also email me at info@carnivorecast.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep it carnivore.